This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
A 14-year-old fired one round, and Tariq died at the young age of 20.
That's Azim Khamisa. His son Tariq was delivering a pizza when he was shot by a 14-year-old gang member.
I lost strength in both of my legs as I collapsed to the floor.
Today we hear how Azim moved from that deep grief toward working alongside his son's killer to end cycles of violence for youth.
Tony said to me, "Daddy, that's a very special man. I killed his one and only son. Not only has he forgiven me, he's offered me a job."
All coming right up. I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Gandhi once famously said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Emotional hurts, insults, violence may all become seed for the flowering of retaliation. Hurt people, as conventional wisdom has it. The cycle of violence seems inexorable, unstoppable. Yet there are exemplars to the contrary who find a way to transcend the cycle.
It took me 5 years, 1,000-hour plus meditation, to feel the courage to go meet him. Because eventually I knew that for me to complete my journey of forgiveness, I had to come eyeball to eyeball with Tony.
My guest today, Azim Khamisa, knows what it's like to experience the pain of cycles of violence. His 20-year-old son Tariq was delivering a pizza when he was approached by 4 young gang members. A 14-year-old with a pistol, yes, a 14-year-old, named Tony Hicks, fired one shot in a senseless moment and killed Azim's son. There followed the expected grief and pain for Azim, but amidst that grief and pain, an unexpected possibility.
First thing that my buddy said to me when we were alone is, "Whoever these kids are that killed Tariq, I hope they fry in hell." And I looked at him and I said, "I don't feel that way. I see that there are victims at both ends of the gun."
So how is it that Azim's own grief and pain was transformed into compassion and forgiveness over time, even for his son's killer? What's more, how did he go on to form a foundation to end cycles of youth violence in his son's name?
To teach the principles of nonviolence, accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness.
Today, our conversation with Azim Khamisa, how his faith as a Sufi Muslim helped him in this tragedy, and just how his son's killer is now working alongside Azim as they help hundreds of thousands of young people avoid the same fate. Azim Khamisa is an author, peace activist, and public speaker, born in Kenya, educated in England in mathematics, economics, and international finance. He has over 45 years of experience as a successful international investment banker, but for the last number of decades has given much of his life and time to the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, which seeks to halt the cycle of violence among youth. And in that work, he's authored 5 books, has kept what seems to be an endless speaking calendar, and is the recipient of 80 regional, national, and international awards. Azim, thank you so much for having us here with you today.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you, Lee.
It's nice to meet you. So you were born in Kenya?
I was born in Kenya, right?
Yes. When you think of kind of formative experiences for you as a young person in Kenya, what are some of those things that stand out to you, as whether it's family or formative experiences?
Well, it's a wonderful place to grow up, and we had gazelles and deers in our backyard, and beautiful weather. And although my ethnic roots are Indian, and depends how far back you want to go, although Azim is a Persian name, but my grandfather moved to Kenya in 1906. I grew up as a Sufi Muslim, but I interacted with people that were of different cultures and different religions. So I thought that was a good way to grow up in, that you had exposure to so many different faiths and cultures and lifestyles.
For those who are unaware of some of the basic tenets of Sufism, would you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Sufism is essentially the mystical interpretation of Islam. So very similar in the Jewish faith, you have the Kabbalah, which is a mystical interpretation of the Jewish faith. And in the Christian faith, you have the Quakers, which could be looked at as a mystical interpretation. Even Ignatius Loyola, he started the movement, which is different. In the Catholic, they're much more metaphysical. Thomas Merton comes to my mind. He's very much was influenced by Eastern religion. So Sufism is essentially very focused on meditation. I used to meditate an hour when my son was alive. Now my meditation is 2 hours a day. And of course, we are known for twirling dervishes. We dance and we chant. And we look at the hidden meaning of the scriptures. So Sufism is very different than fundamentals. Unfortunately, most of our major religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are primarily fundamentalists. The metaphysical interpretation of all of these three faiths is very small, as you probably already know. And I speak a lot, and I was speaking at a conference in Berkeley University, and there was a Sufi that had a degree in Sufism and Islam and taught Islam. So I thought, I'll go listen to him. And he was very funny. He says, I don't get fundamentalists. He says, think about it. It's not much fun. It's not very mental. So I guess the meaning must lie in the middle syllable da. So I thought that explained it well. Because in Sufism, we have more of an ecumenical view. So if you take a Kabbalah and a Sufi and a Quaker, they have very few issues between them, whereas if you look at the fundamentalists, they have more issues. And yet, as you probably know, that we all pray to the same God, right? The God of Abraham.
Yeah.
So
this contemplative tradition in which Azim was steeped became a lifeline in 1995.
he was a good kid, good student.
Here Azim is speaking of his son, Tariq, who was aged 20 in 1995. Tariq was studying journalism at the time.
He wanted to eventually work for National Geographic. He was a gifted writer. He was a talented photographer and worked as a pizza delivery man, on Fridays and Saturdays to make some extra money for college.
Tariq was lured to a bogus address at random by members of a gang. Once at the address with pizza in hand, he was accosted by 4 young gang members.
The leader was 18 years old, and the other 3 were 14 years old. And the 18-year-old handed a 9mm handgun, and my son is in the car trying to back his car and gave the order to a 14-year-old who fired 1 round, which came through the driver's side window, entered my son's body under the left shoulder blade, traveled across the upper part of his chest, and it exited from his right armpit. And Tariq died a couple of minutes later over a lousy pizza at the young age of 20.
Azim was standing in his kitchen when the phone rang, a call from the police. His first thought, It must be a case of mistaken identity. It could not possibly be his son. But then he called his son's fiancée, Jennifer, and it turned out that the horror was true. Tariq was dead.
I lost strength in both of my legs as I collapsed to the floor. Hit my head against the refrigerator, curled up in a ball. I don't have the words to describe how excruciatingly painful that experience was. Literally like a nuclear bomb that had gone off in my heart, and that I was blown into millions of smithereens that I knew would never ever be found or come back together. And the pain was so unbearable that I had my first out-of-body experience. Because I've heard that when victims go through deep trauma like this, they often leave their body because they can't be in their body, because the pain is unbearable. And I believe in God, and I believe I went into the loving embrace of God. And I don't recall how long I was gone for. Felt like a long time. And when the explosion subsided, God sent me back into my body. And then I had to make those very difficult and excruciating calls to his mother, my daughter, my parents. And then I called my best friend because I lived by myself. And he said, don't do anything. Kit and I will right with the kid. His name is Dan, and Kit was his wife. And they were with me an hour and a half after I found out. And by that time, homicide had visited us and told us that there were some eyewitnesses, that there was a youth gang involved with Tariq's death, and they were following up on some leads. And the first thing that my buddy said to me when we were alone is, whoever these kids are that killed Tariq, I hope they fry in hell. And I looked at him and I said, I don't feel that way. I see that there are victims at both ends of the gun. And I remember he broke down and cried. He said, Azim, where do you get this strength? If somebody took Adam, which was his son, not only would I want the killers, I want the whole clan. I never really went there. And then when 3 years later, I wrote my first book, it was because I was asked so many times, how did you react that way? And the short answer is, it's not something that came from my intellect. I don't think us mortals are capable of it, or my loving heart. It was more of a download from a higher power. I came with that vision after my out-of-body experience. And I didn't really realize that till much later. I started the foundation 9 months after Tariq died.
Azim founded the Tariq Khamisa Foundation to end cycles of youth violence. The foundation has connected with over 500,000 youth in communities across San Diego County since its founding. But for Azim, shortly after starting the foundation, he knew he had to start ending cycles of violence right at the epicenter of the violence in his own life, with the family of Tony Hicks. Tony was the 14-year-old boy who had shot Tariq, but Azim wasn't quite ready to reach out yet to Tony directly.
I reached out to his grandfather with the attitude, I'm not here screaming retribution and revenge because your grandson killed my son. I've reached out to you because I am concerned about how you're dealing with this. And the way I see it is we both lost a son. Because Tony lived with his grandfather and calls him daddy. He got Tony at the age of 8. And I've started this foundation with a very lofty mission of stopping kids from killing kids. I need your help. Will you help me? And he was very quick to take my hand of forgiveness. He said to me, thank you for reaching out to me. Ever since I I found out that my grandson was responsible for the death of your son, I went into the prayer closet, praying that someday I get an opportunity to meet you so I can extend my condolences to you and your family. And thank you for reaching out to me. And yes, of course, I will help you. And he has stood by my side for this 28 years.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Azim Khamisa. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode, as well as a PDF of my complete interview notes and a full transcript. We'd be delighted if you tell your friends about No Small Endeavor, invite them to join us on the podcast, because that helps extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Coming up, Azim shares how his Sufi Muslim faith, its rituals for grief, and its community helped him transform the tragedy of his son's death. If you've enjoyed our episode with some of the Hollywood stars like Rob Reiner, Martin Sheen, or Rainn Wilson, then you should check out the new season of the wildly popular podcast Revisionist History. Hosted by No Small Endeavor friend and New York Times bestselling author Malcolm Gladwell, the new season of Revisionist History digs into stories that fell apart, like Hollywood projects that fell apart and why they did. Malcolm speaks with the minds behind some of Hollywood's biggest hits and asks them to pitch their favorite ideas, the ones that broke their heart because they never got made. It's a season all about a phrase that no one in Hollywood ever wants to hear: development hell. You can listen to those stories on Revisionist History wherever you get your podcasts. We've often raised the fact that whatever living a good life means, it cannot mean insulation from the hardships of life or pretending as if we can shield ourselves from grief. So I often find myself wondering how those who have experienced great grief bear that endeavor. For Azim, a significant part of the answer was his faith. Azim is a practicing Sufi Muslim, and Sufism entails extensive rituals for grief, including chant and dance. And I asked Azim to share what those rituals had meant to him.
Well, I'll give you an example. When Tariq died, 1,400 people were at his funeral. In our tradition, everybody passes in a single file around his body. He's dressed in a white unstitched cloth, because we bury dust to dust. And while 1,400 people going in a single file around his body, it took 2.5 hours. And during that 2.5 hours, we chanted. We have a chant called Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. It's a chant that you normally use in times of difficulty and trauma. And think about it, 1,400 people chanting in unison for 2.5 hours. Totally changes your conscience, because part of our tradition is for me to actually step into the grave to accept my son's body. Tariq died on a Saturday. The funeral was on a Thursday. He was on a litter, and I had one of the poles on my left shoulder, one on my right shoulder. My brother was in the back, and my nephews were on the side. But as we went through the hall, from the front of the hall, where the funeral prayers were recited, to the hearse that was waiting on the outside, we had to actually walk through the hall, and everyone that was there put their hand on the gurney, like we are helping you carry your weight. So those rituals were what kind of saved me. And the chant was so powerful that I was actually able to climb into the grave and accept his body, which very difficult.
So you physically climbed into his grave?
I was down 6 feet, and I had help. There were a couple of volunteers down there as they lowered my son's body on the gurney. and accepted it. And I remember I stayed there a very long time. And I don't think I could have done that without the chant. And I remember thinking, bury me with him. I didn't want to leave him there alone. I mean, he's my only son. Obviously, I have a daughter. And those early days were very difficult. I was suicidal at one point because I really did not know how to move forward without him. So then my best friend went up with me and he pulled me out of the grave. It was my turn to put some dirt on top of it that cover his face. And you take a spade and you pick up some dirt that is already mounted. And everybody that was at the funeral then followed me with adding more dirt on top of his body. And then we go back to the funeral hall and have a meal and prayers and for everybody that was there. But part of the Sufi tradition is we grieve for 40 days. I think there's a similar ritual in the Jewish faith called sitting Shiva. I believe it's 9 days. And during those 40 days, you are supposed to grieve. So I had people from my congregation that brought meals. And they offered to clean your home, whatever assistance you need, they would offer. But I had to tell the story. And since Tariq died in such a tragic manner, they wanted all of the details. And I couldn't even say Tariq died. I couldn't say the word died because it was early and it was like sending a 2,000 amp volt through my system. But they would wait. In between stories, we would chant. And that was very useful. And the 40 days, as my spiritual teacher taught me, that according to the Sufi tradition that I grew up, is that the reason you grieve for 40 days is the soul of the departed person is in close proximity of family and loved ones. And that at the end of the 40 days, his soul moves to a different consciousness in preparation for his forward journey. You have prayers at the funeral, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, but the most significant prayers are at the 40-day mark, because that ends the grieving period. Because as I was taught by my spiritual teacher, that your son's spirit now is moved to a different consciousness in preparation of his forward journey. And excessive grieving after 40 days by family and loved ones will impede his journey in the next world. My recommendation to you is to do good deeds, because good, compassionate deeds done in the name of the departed are spiritual currency and provide high-octane fuel for his journey in the next world.
Yeah, fascinating.
I thought, why don't they teach you this stuff in college?
Yeah. 9 months after Tariq's death and funeral, Azim started the Tariq Khamisa Foundation to stop cycles of violence for youth. Shortly afterward, he asked the grandfather of the boy who killed Tariq to join him.
I figured that we're not going to wake up one day and find that the world is at peace. We have to proactively work every single day. And here we are. The foundation is in its 28th year. The grandfather and I are still together. I would never have met him had his grandson not killed my son. He is African American. He is Christian. He grew up as a Baptist from the South, and I'm a Muslim. And he's as close to me as my own brother. He's a master's degree in urban development, 2 tours of Vietnam as a Green Beret. So he served our country. And one of the most intelligent human beings. I've learned a lot from him. And very street smart, because he grew up in South Central LA where Tony was born. Tony was a young man that took my son's life.
2 years after Tariq's death, Tony Hicks had a hearing to see if he would be tried as a juvenile or an adult. 20 days earlier, the age had been lowered for capital crime from 16 to 14, making Tony eligible to be tried as an adult, something Azim was against. The night before the hearing, Tony's grandfather went to see Tony. He had raised Tony, and though he was Tony's grandfather, Tony called him Daddy. And when he arrived at the prison, Tony
jumped into his grandfather's lap. He's 16 years old. And they have this ritual where they have fruit when they have a difficult conversation. So Place talks about it. I brought an apple and an orange and talked to Tony, and he cried and said, "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I will do the right thing." And at the hearing, he gives a very cathartic speech, which we still use in our programs in the foundation, where he says, "I shot and killed Tariq Khamisa, a person I did not know who was not doing anything wrong to me." It never happens, because when the judge asks, "How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?" 99% of the time they say, "Not guilty." He didn't say that. "I shot and killed Tariq Khamisa, a person I did not know who was not doing anything wrong to me. I am guilty." 16 and a half years old. In the same speech, he says, "I pray to God that Mr. Khamisa would forgive me for the pain that I've caused him." I'd already forgiven him, but it was meaningful for me that he asked for my forgiveness. And the judge told him, "This is not about murder. This is just a hearing to decide whether you should be tried as an adult or as a juvenile." And Tony said, "I don't want to drag my family and Mr. Khamisa's family through a trial." So because he had already said, "I'm guilty," she had to sentence him. She actually quoted me at the hearing, saying that I felt he was a victim as well. I felt that he was a victim of society, of American society. And begs the question, well, who's American society? Well, it's you and me and whoever's listening to this podcast. Societies don't happenstance. Everyone who's responsible, who's an American citizen, is responsible for a society we've created. We are reflected in our society. Well, children killing children is not a mark of a civil society. How did we get here is the question I asked. Where children kill children. It doesn't happen in other countries. In the study, they took 25 countries in the world, first world countries, like England, Germany, France, Australia, Canada, Japan. And they added all the kids that die in those 25 countries, took the total, multiplied that by 11. That's how many we lose in the US of A. And that was a few years ago. It's more now. So I felt that he was a victim of society. And as an American citizen, I felt I should take my share of the responsibility for the bullet that took my son's life. Why? Because it was fired by an American child. When you could take the position, he should be hung from the highest pole. He killed my one and only son. Well, how does that make a better society?
Tony was sentenced to 25 years to life with parole, the more lenient of the two options at the judge's disposal, trying a 14-year-old as an adult. Though Azim had seen Tony in court and heard him speak, he still had not actually met him face to face yet.
It took me 5 years. 1,000-hour plus meditation to feel the courage to go meet him. Because eventually I knew that for me to complete my journey of forgiveness, I had to come eyeball to eyeball with Tony. So after about 4.5 years, I told Place I'm ready to meet Tony. My mother was told I was crazy. She didn't think I was safe. I said, "Don't worry about him. Tony's not going to hurt me." Well, Tony wasn't quite ready because this was not even on his radar screen that I ever reach out to him. So he had to prepare himself. But it didn't take him very long. 6 months later, Place said, "Tony is ready." So I told him, "Place, I want you to go with me because this is the first time I'm meeting Tony." And I said, "You are his grandfather. He was the last person to see my son. I have some tough questions to ask him. And with you there, he's going to be defensive. I need alone time with Tony. He said, no problem, Azim. He was very graceful. So we met, the three of us together, for about half an hour. We talked about his day in prison. And then the grandfather left me and Tony to speak man to man. He was 19 years old. And we spent a couple of hours together. And he answered my questions. But the seminal moment in that meeting is that we locked eyeballs. And I'm looking in his eyes, trying to find a murderer. And he held my glance for what seemed like a long time, almost uncomfortable. But I was able to climb through his eyes and touch his humanity that I got, that the spark in him was no different than the spark in me. I was able to touch his soul. I wasn't expecting that. But Tony was well-mannered. He was articulate. He was remorseful. A likable kid. If you walked through those doors, you would have the same impression of him. He didn't portray any of the typical attitude of a 19-year-old or his initial bravado. I could see that my forgiveness had changed him. So at that point I told him, Tony, you know I have forgiven you. But I want you to know, when you come out of prison, you can join the foundation and come work for the foundation. And after a couple of hours, we got back together, and then soon after I left. And I remember walking out of that prison. And Tony's 42 now, so that was over 22 years ago, 23 years ago. I still remember that my stride leaving the prison was a lot more bouncier than the one I'd walked in with. It was like, forgiveness can be very freeing. It was like a big albatross that was lifted off my shoulders. And the preeminent thought as I was leaving the prison was, why did I wait 5 years? It was a very freeing moment. At that point, I knew I had completed my journey of forgiveness. The next day, the grandfather calls me and says, Azim, that meeting you had with Tony has transformed him 180 degrees. He says, as you were leaving, Tony said to me, Daddy, that's a very special man. I killed his one and only son. Not only has he forgiven me, he's offered me a job. I'm not worthy of his forgiveness or his job offer, but I'm going to try.
Tony made every effort he could to do good work in prison and to make something good with his life. Azim, too, was certain to make good on his job offer. So in 2019, Azim and his daughter, that is Tariq's sister, had a chance to go in front of a parole board in an attempt to get Tony released from prison.
And my testimony was that Tony has work to do, but not behind bars. He has to come work for the foundation because he's not the same person he was when he was 14. And when he's on stage with me, which we have done since he's been out, and he says to the kids, when I was 11, I joined a gang. When I was 14, I murdered Mr. Khamisa's son. I wish I could turn the clock back. How many 11 years old in the audience that are thinking about getting involved with a gang will change their mind? And the commissioner was in tears. He said, I've been doing this work for 25 years. I've never had the victim's father and sister advocate for the offender's release. And I said to him, well, I always saw Tony as a victim, and he can save a lot of young people. Please grant him his parole. And he did, which never happens. When the first time you go in front of a parole hearing, you don't normally win parole.
going to take a short break, but coming right up, Azim discusses the work of the Tariq Khamisa Foundation.
These principles of accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, peacemaking, peace building, that not only are these soft skills teachable, our kids are hungry for them.
Hey there. Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSE Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSE Notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter.
Tony has work to do, but not behind bars. He has to come work for the foundation because he's not the same person he was when he was 14.
Shortly after Tariq's death, Azim had founded the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. Their initial mission was to stop kids from killing kids by breaking the cycle of youth violence. And now his son's killer was out and working alongside Azim to stop this from happening to others.
We reach, 15, 20,000 kids every year. So actually our 28th year, over 2 million kids, over 150,000 letters from kids teaching these principles of nonviolence. And he's now very impactful, especially with those kids that may be on that slippery slope like he was when he joined the gang. So it's an amazing story to see how all of that has created something beautiful from something that is like a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Yeah? I mean, something that I would never have expected, everything that has manifested in my life in the last 28 years. That was the 20th anniversary we just passed. I would have never, ever dreamt in my wildest dreams that all this has manifested as a result of choosing to forgive.
The Tariq Khamisa Foundation has 3 mandates.
First was to save children. Don't have to tell you, we lose one every hour. We've had so many mass killings, couple a day, 600 in the year we just passed. And I was shocked about the number of young souls like Tariq that we lose. And we lose the others too, the ones that do the killing, because they are victims as well, is the way I saw it. I couldn't fathom we are the richest nation in the world. And I didn't feel we were doing enough to save our young children. So the foundation mission was to save lives of children, to empower the right choices so they don't fall to the crack and get involved with gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. And to teach the principles of nonviolence, of accountability, empathy, of compassion, forgiveness. I forgave my son's killer.
The foundation teaches the following 6 tenets to kids as a part of its safe school model. 1, violence is real and hurts everyone. 2, actions have consequences. 3, youth can make good and nonviolent choices. 4, youth can work toward forgiveness as opposed to seeking revenge. 5, everyone deserves to be loved and treated well. 6, from conflict, love and unity are possible. This challenging final tenet, from conflict, love and unity are possible, this seems borne out not only in Azim's life, as we've heard, but also in his years of writing a trilogy of books on the path from conflict to such love and unity.
My first book was From Murder to Forgiveness. And the sequel was From Forgiveness to Fulfillment, because the work I've done in the aftermath of my son's tragedy has been very fulfilling. And the trilogy is From Fulfillment to Peace. And Tony wrote the foreword to that. So it's a 20-plus year journey that started very, very dark with murder, but ended in peace. And it's helped so many young people and adults. I do a 2-day workshop on teach 3 milestone steps of how you forgive people that have harmed you, and 2 milestones of how you forgive yourselves, because at some level we've all harmed too. It's a very popular and cathartic workshop, and most everyone gets a breakthrough. So it's not an easy thing to forgive, especially for us. We live in a very judging world. And that's probably the biggest impediment to forgiveness is judgment. I've been very fortunate. I met some amazing human beings in this last 27 years, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I've met him 6 times now. And he was the one that told me the biggest impediment to forgiveness, Azim, is judgment. These principles of accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, peacemaking, peace building, that not only are these soft skills teachable, our kids are hungry for them. And here today, we still do the assembly. We just did one last week. We've now followed it up with a 10-week curriculum, which is grade specific. 3 levels. The first is 4th and 5th. Second is 6th and 7th. The third is 8th and 9th. So we focus from 4th grade to 9th grade. Tony joined the gang in 6th grade and took my son's life in 8th grade. And after the 10-week curriculum, where we teach these socio-emotional skills, we create a peace club on campus, which essentially is a leadership program with about 60 titles. Idea being that we inspire young people to become nonviolent leaders committed to peace building and peacemaking within themselves, their families, their schools, and their community. And then we have a mentoring program. So the first 3 programs, the assembly, the curriculum, and the peace club, goes to the entire campus. The mentoring goes to those 8 to 12% that are on that slippery slope, which is a big number because most San Diego inner city school, middle schools have about 1,000 kids. Between 80 and 120 potentially are going to be involved with gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. So those we mentor. And the results have been phenomenal, that we've cut expulsions and suspensions by over 70%. We've improved SAT scores. Kids are kinder. Even the schools are impressed with how much empathy and compassion that they are willing to show. So in San Diego County, there are 42 unified school districts. And we work with all of them. They provide direct services. And it's very affordable. Not only are the results more impactful, our cost, it wasn't always that way, but we've been able to bring the cost way down. Because it costs $11,547 to provide free K through 12 education. It costs $148,000 to incarcerate a youth for 1 year.
Oh, wow.
It's over $400 a day. And listen to this, even after spending that kind of money, the recidivism rate is 84%.
That is, 84% of those that are released from prison then later find themselves back in prison for some other offense. Only 16% stay out of prison after release.
Tony is one of those 16%. So essentially you're spending this money lifelong because it's like a turnstile, right?
Right.
The cost of our safe school model is under $50 a kid a year. So you don't have to be an investment banker to know that's a good investment, you know? So So now we've started to expand nationally. So we have a second site in Pennsylvania. And about a couple of years ago, we opened one in Colorado. So when we leave San Diego County, we become a training institute. Mm. Here we have mentors at our own school campuses, the whole 9 yards. But then when we go outside of San Diego, we essentially train the counselors and the social workers. Most schools have those to essentially then teach our curriculum to students. Mm. So,
but the website again, if people want to learn more?
The website for the foundation is tkf.org. T as in Tom, K as in King, F as in Frank.org. It's a very robust website. And those people are involved with schools or teachers or counselors, if they are interested in our Safe School model, to please contact us.
Again, if you're interested in this curriculum to end cycles of violence in youth, you can visit tkf.org for more information. When you now, 28 years later, remember Tariq, what are some memories of him, pictures of him, images of him that come to mind that are fond to you?
He had a very great sense of humor. Didn't get it from me. I'm more of a serious guy. He, could crack a joke or break up even a very tense moment. Yeah. And he just had an amazing personality. He loved children. Mm. Children loved him. Mm. And his birthday is March 6th. He would have been 49 years old in a couple of months. His favorite hero was Gandhi. And he wrote this piece called My Philosophy of Life, where there are 6 aphorisms that I have on my wall over there. And it's an amazing piece where he talks about how you can never be discouraged, even when you lose, how live by giving, even if you give somebody a smile. We don't have enough time on this planet. Obviously, he must have had a premonition because he died 20 years. It's a good quote by somebody that says, God gave us memories so we can have roses in December. So there are some wonderful memories. Yeah. And I think you go back to those. So that was a good question, especially during times of anniversaries like we just had. Those are very difficult, even 28 years later.
We've been talking to Azim Khamisa. Thank you for your generosity in sharing your story and for being willing to tell it again another time, and for your work of compassion and generosity and love and forgiveness in the world. And you've honored us, and I thank you.
You're very welcome, Lee, and thanks for having me on your show.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Azim Khamisa. You can find out more about Azim and the Tariq Khamisa Foundation at tkf.org and azimkhamisa.com. And you can reach Azim through his email address, azim@azimkhamisa.com. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion, and the support of the John Templeton Foundation, whose vision is to become a global catalyst for discoveries that contribute to human flourishing. Thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriot Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.